Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From ignorance lead me to the truth. From darkness lead me to light. From death lead me to immortality. Om peace, peace, peace. Chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna continues from chapter 7. Especially the third line here. From death lead me to immortality. This subject is taken up in chapter 8 in very detail. Continues from all the tough concepts we saw last week. Anything, oops, it's still this way, okay. Any experience requires a backdrop in which that experience needs to take place, right? So it's fairly obvious. If you're able to watch a movie, it requires a screen on which you should be able to watch it. You cannot watch a movie without a backdrop, a screen upon which the projection takes place. If you're a teacher and you're writing on the board, for the kids to be able to see a subject, you need a backdrop on which you can write something. You can't write it in air, isn't it? You need a backdrop. Anything that can be experienced requires a backdrop. So if your emotions can be experienced, in what backdrop is this emotions being experienced? The mind itself is just mind itself is not a backdrop. Mind is just a collection of thoughts and feelings and sensations and memories. For you to cognize that and understand, I can experience happiness. On what is this happiness appearing? Like the movie appears on the screen, the writing appears on the blackboard. The galaxies appear in the backdrop of space. The space-time is the backdrop upon which the universe is held together. In what backdrop are you able to experience happiness? It's a tough philosophical question. And how deep can you go to understand what's the backdrop which does not have a backdrop anymore? You can say upon the backdrop of the eyes, the tree is visible. Upon the backdrop of the mind, the eyes, the ears, the nose, they're all experienced. So the senses are the backdrops to the sense objects. The mind is the backdrop to sensory perceptions. But the mind also is experienced. Thoughts and emotions and sensations and memories are experienced by you. What's the backdrop upon which these sensations come in and go? Anything that comes in and goes requires a backdrop. Because when it goes, the backdrop is still there for the next thing to come in, isn't it? Your own ego, consciousness itself comes and goes. This entire waker world and your ego of this state of consciousness now, sitting there in your chair or standing up. This entire ego vanishes when you sleep in the night. But the backdrop remains, because upon that backdrop is projected another world, the dream state. But that also goes. And then the backdrop remains, upon which nothing is projected. That also expires after a while, upon which your fully conscious state is projected again. The I remains the same across these, isn't it? That deepest backdrop, what we call the innermost Sakshi, is one and the same with the universal Brahman, is the promise of Advaita Vedanta. And through the next chapters, we want to realize that, what that means. But this chapter in particular talks about that imperishable backdrop that always remains. And Krishna touches upon a few very key topics in this chapter, including what happens to your soul, your jivatma after death. What are the paths it can take? He also talks about the imperishable nature of Brahman. He also talks about some of the jargons he introduced in the previous chapter, which went unexplained. So that's chapter 8. So let's go to the screen. So if you look at the screen here, so you see creation, sustenance, creation, sustenance, and death. So things come and things go. Now think of this as the Panchabhutas, right? From a matter level, this could be a star, this could be your solar system, or this could be an everyday thing. People are born, people live, and people die. This could even be your subtle matter, your thoughts, your emotions. Anger arises, anger is sustained, anger dies. Then happiness comes in, happiness is sustained, happiness dies. Elation comes in, sustains, dies. Your thoughts and memories, your memories come to your mind, they are sustained for a while, they die. Pain comes in, they are sustained, and it dies. So all of this, your own childhood is born, childhood is sustained for a while, childhood dies, and adulthood is born, adulthood sustained and dies. Then old age is born, old age sustains, old age dies. Your waker state is born, it's sustained and dies. The deep sleep comes, it is sustained and dies. The dreamer state comes and sustained and dies. A flower is born, a flower lives and dies. A dog is born, a dog lives and dies. Everything that is matter has birth, sustenance, and death. Anything. Probably the duration of sustenance may matter, but it differ. A star may sustain for 1 billion years, but a little tiny bird may be sustained for a few days. A tiny mosquito may sustain for a few hours. Some microorganisms get sustained for a few seconds, or maybe lesser than that. You may get sustained for 60, 70 years, 80 years, whatever. But one thing is assured is that everything is born, everything is sustained, everything dies. Where is it born from? Who sustains it? And what happens after death? We don't know. Because we are seeing only the foreground, isn't it? Self-realization is asking two questions. One question that leads to the answer of the Saguna nature of Brahman. What is that question? What is animating or giving life to this otherwise inert matter that is created, sustained, and dead? Meaning, what gives consciousness or the life principle to an otherwise inert piece of body, which is just accumulation of food and panchabhutas? What gives it consciousness? Where does it come from? Where does it go? That is the Saguna nature of Brahman, which plays the role of God, according to Krishna. Creates things, sustains things, and destroys things. Then there is a Nirguna nature of Brahman, which is the ever-present, solitary, non-interfering backdrop called Nirguna Brahman, or the self, your own Atman, the ultimate Sakshi. Now that is the backdrop of all backdrops. When you realize that, you realize that's the same backdrop which is totally non-interfering, but it plays the role of Saguna to animate your own consciousness when it comes in contact with matter, Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. And then you realize that alone is. So we'll get to that in the slokas. But that's the nature of this backdrop, is that it's imperishable. Everything that appears on it is perishable. What is Kshara? Is the contents in consciousness, in the pure consciousness, which destroy. What is Akshara? It is that ever-present, solitary, imperishable, indestructible, non-aging, unbound by time, space, causation, is always there. And you are that now. What are the contents that appear in this consciousness? Your ego, your own mind, the world of matter, everything that can be experienced, basically. Why can't this indestructible background be experienced by itself? It cannot. Because you need a further backdrop to experience this backdrop. There is no further backdrop. It is the subject that is the experiencer itself. How can that be experienced? It is in 5. Arjuna, he who thinks of me alone, the self alone, even at the time of death, he attains my state. No doubt about it. Arjuna, the body at the time of death, that and that alone you will attain. Being absorbed in its thought, being very absorbed in its thought. So Krishna says, whatever is important to you, whatever you've reinforced, whether you want good things to happen to you, if you want a better life next birth, whatever you reinforced at the time of leaving your body, which actually could be any time, because you never know when you're going to leave your body. At any point, the snapshot of what you're most excited about, what your desires are, that and that alone you will be projecting or being born in again. If that is me, if you're obsessed and thinking of me, then you attain my state. If you're obsessed and thinking of a better life, then you obtain a better life, still in samsara. If you're obsessed with tamas, then you project a tamasic world and tamasic life. Whatever you reinforce is what comes through again. You may be disgusted with life and desire to end your own life. That doesn't mean things are going to be any better. You're going to experience, if the same desires manifest again, which it will, you are in the equal shit again. It's very complicated for us to just shoo away. When the field of matter go away, sir, meaning when the body dies, the Jivatma, with its own Vasana imprints, necessarily projects birth after birth to satiate to express its own desires, till there is nothing to express according to the Gita. And the only way out, Krishna says in chapter 8, is to completely exclusive devotion to me, Arjuna, the self. Who am I? I am the self. And total detachment and vairagya to everything else. That alone will remove you from the cycle of birth and death and eradicate further karmic imprints, however great they are, however world-saving they are still dragging you into samsara. So 6 is an important sloka. Then Arjuna, whosoever always and constantly thinks of me with undivided mind, to that yogi Arjuna, ever absorbed in me, I am easily attainable. Great souls who have attained this highest perfection, having come to me, are no more subject to transitory rebirth, which is an abode of sorrow and transient by nature. Arjuna, again important sloka, Arjuna, all the worlds there are 14 lokas, isn't it? The highest is Brahma Loka. Brahma Loka downwards, because above Brahma Loka is having realized the self. Everything Brahma Loka and below are different lokas. In a way, lokas are just greater, good karma, great bank balance, you get entry ticket into a higher loka. You cash in on that karma there. Develop desires and reinforce attachments. And it comes with its own cost. You've not invested cash anymore. You've cashed in already what your bank balance was. So what happens, sir? You're downgraded into a lower loka, which just means your experience of life is corresponding. Then you probably hit the bottom rock. You hit the bottom of the pit. You are in the bottom lokas, which is technically hell. Life is bad. Your experience of life is, more importantly, you become tamasic. It's like a womb, embryo inside a womb. All this Vedanta business will not speak to you at that point in time. You become animalistic in nature. We all go through the cycle if we leave ourselves unattended. You may be lucky where you are today, that you are probably, who knows, this could be your Brahmalok, or this could be 1 or 2 steps below that. Why? Because you have the privilege to entertain yourself with these topics. You have the luxury to have an intellect sharp enough to absorb some parts of it. You have the time, physical energy, mental bandwidth to revel in topics that 99.9% of the people don't revel in. Probably this is your Brahma Loka. The question is, how much of it are you cashing in? What are you doing with this opportunity that you've got, which not only 99.99 people don't have, but no other creature in this world has. Animals, lower species. This is probably a Brahmalok. We think this is hell. Who knows? This is probably Brahmalok in terms of how lucky we are. Now, most often, because we don't realize it, we cash in on all the advantages that we have: physical, mental, intellectual opportunities. Unfortunately, we don't escape samsara when we can, when the knowledge is available, when our own physical, mental, intellectual bandwidth is available. So then what happens? Krishna says, this is like the Bhava Chakra that we have seen a few years ago. Similar, the 14 lokas is a downgrade, upgrade. It's like a GMAT exam, like an adaptive scoring test, sir. Say you are in the 7th loka now. I'm just making it a joke. It's deeper than this, but simple way to understand is, say you start at 7, out of 1 to 14, 1 being the worst. 14 being heaven, Brahmalok. You say start at 7. Say you accumulate points because each higher loka has a more costly entry ticket. You do good. You are more sattvic. You cultivate generosity. Not that by itself is good, but it makes you more sattvic. So you have a looser grip on life. You are generally happy with everything. So those are all great karmic points. Why? Because the karmic imprints of having a loose grip of life is that nobody can hurt you. The karmic footprint of not having ego is that you don't take resentment. So basically, your oscillations are not that much, which means you get a better karmic bank balance on the positive side. Therefore, you can buy entry ticket into Loka number 10 now. Or probably you're so good, you get entry ticket into Brahmalok. At some point, sir, if you don't use that propulsion to get away from samsara itself, you can't permanently be in Brahmalok, however tempting that may be. Why? Because the entry ticket is an annual renewal, sir. You need renewal. Membership needs to be renewed in that loka, right? You had the money, so you got into it. But come year end, the champagne bottle is going to be taken away. The royal seat with the velvet pillow is going to be taken away unless you renew it. And if you can't renew, they're going to say, sir, we got to downgrade you from platinum membership to gold membership. Then from gold to silver, then silver to bronze. And after bronze, you kicked out. Then you say, sir, bronze, fine, but now you can't even fly. You have to take the bus. Then you walk. Then you crawl. Then you realize how disgusting it is. So you want to work your way up again. You've reached the bottom of the pit. The samsara continues, sir. This is also eternal. Krishna says, self alone is not eternal. This also is eternal, the cycle of birth and death. That's the two paths that he's going to talk about later. So important. The cycle of birth and death is as eternal to the ignorant as the self is eternal to the wise. What a statement. So here in 16 he says, karma is all about entry tickets. For Arjuna, all the worlds from Brahmalok downwards are liable to birth and rebirth. Everything is liable to birth and rebirth. Everything is liable to that. What did we see in the beginning of this class? The things are created, they sustain, they disappear. Your experience of Brahmalok also begins, it's sustained, it disappears. Soon you're crawling in the streets. That is also temporary. Brahmalok is also temporary. All lokas are temporary. Your great life today is temporary. Your remote consequences of today's action, which could be a very average experience of life in the future, that's also temporary. But all of these are subject to therefore birth and death. Then what Krishna says, but that person, but on attaining me, which is the ability to see the transience across the lokas, the ability to see that non-moving, ever solitary, sakshi, the imperishable behind this ever-changing samsara. On attaining me, on realizing that there is no rebirth, because you're not in any of the lokas. You are the backdrop on which all of this natak is happening. Why? In brackets here, it's Krishna is saying, for I am beyond time, Arjuna. Regions like Brahmaloka, being conditioned by time, are all transitory as well. So he says, fools, the lower yogis are the ones who do actions for reaching some heaven and Brahmalok and Vaikunta and all of that. The higher yogis, the wise people, only try to know me, because it's me alone from which there is no return. The heavens are also temporary. What a shattering notion of traditional belief across religions. So you got to ask, if we think that the heaven is where champagne will be pouring and whatever, each religion has its own belief of what heaven is and it's not, and there'll be permanent happiness. What does that even mean, sir? What if you, after a point, you're going to get tired of that? Then what? Like, this concept of heaven is sometimes so shocking to even see how we can entertain some permanence in a conception of heaven that is given to us. So if whatever mind you have here, it's the same mind you'll take to heaven. If you're a jealous person here, you'll go to heaven and say, but that guy has a better wine glass than me. Yes, there is infinite wine pouring everywhere in heaven. If that's your conception of heaven, there's something else you'll find a way to get jealous about. If there are people, if there are minds, if there are sensations, if there are emotions, how can there not be the same stuff that happens here that happens in heaven? So the concept of heaven is your own better karma creates a better life, but that is also not sustainable because you're cashing out on all that punya there. And then your own papa therefore creates a worse life, but that is also not permanent, because mostly in harsh conditions, you get rajasic, you bounce back, you gain more punya. So this oscillation is called samsara. The mechanism with which this is accounted for is called karma. All of this stems from ignorance of the transience and purposelessness of all of this. You quell the maya away. You calm your mind away and see that witness, which is unchanging behind all of these lokas that you may be present in. What is that I, untouched, which was untouched, independent of the loka that I was in? What is that I, that me, which did not age as I've aged in my life? I was 20 and now I'm 60. But what is that? My body. My mind was different. Now my mind is different. The collection of sensations, thoughts, memories are different. Now the collection of sensations, thoughts, memories were different 30 years ago. But that solitary witness, the I, that doesn't age. Anyway, so it's the knowing that allows us to get outside this conditionality of Maya. So then Krishna says, everything arises and dissolves in that Saguna Brahman that we spoke about. That is the Brahman, the aspect of Brahman that orchestrates this world, the energy that we call it, the God, the Ishvara. That is Saguna Brahman. The Nirguna Brahman is totally apart from anything. And from Nirguna's Brahman's perspective, nothing is happening. Saguna Brahman is God, the unmanifest nature of matter. That is Saguna Brahman. But Krishna says, even beyond this God, this concept of Saguna Brahman, this concept of unmanifest existence, even beyond that, the Supreme Self does not perish, even though all beings perish. That is spoken, 21. That is spoken of as the Akshara, the imperishable. That is the supreme secret and goal, Arjuna. There is no return from that to the material world governed by karma. This is the supreme secret that Krishna reveals in this chapter, saying that there is an imperishable Brahman. That is a supreme secret. That should also be the supreme goal. And upon knowing that, there is no return to the material world of birth and rebirth. The eternal, imperishable Brahman, 22, which pervades everything, Arjuna, is attainable only through exclusive devotion to know it. It cannot be a simple ride in the park, sir. To get something, the price of the self requires the price of steadfastness. That's the golden rule of life, of spirituality. Because nothing happens as a paroksha. To make it aparoksha, self-evident, the price of that requires the price of viveka and vairagya. It requires exclusive devotion. The fire, like your head is on fire, mumukshatva. But with that earnestness, all wise people attain Krishna, attain that self. There is no exception. It is a sovereign guarantee. We need to set up priorities right. 23. Krishna says, Arjuna, now I will tell you about the two paths yogis can take. One path, which is a one-way ticket. There is no return into samsara. That's called permanent, like nirvikalpa samadhi. The other path, where they do return again and again and again into samsara. Both are yogis, meaning they're devoted. But what they're devoted to makes a big difference. So 24, 25, he explains that. The first path, again, he describes it in many ways. We're not going to get into the technical aspects of these paths. Let's just call it the bright path and the dark path. English translation is weak, but let's use that. The first path is that where the yogi is fully absorbed in me alone and not to action with separate motives apart from me. Not action to become happier, not action to become richer, not action to go to heaven, not action to escape hell, not action to, for anything. But the yogi is fully absorbed only in me, the imperishable. These yogis, having become self-realized, upon death do not return. Why? Because they are worried, concerned themselves only about the backdrop. There is no motive or interest. There is no karma imprint anymore. And when there is no demand to express, there is no supply required to express. If there is no demand and supply, there is no world and projection. So there is no birth and death necessary. So this entire cycle is broken, ignorance is dispelled, and truth alone is. And that can happen instantaneously at this moment. Yeah, I mean, there's a scope. Why can all of this happen instantaneously now? Because if the Nirguna Brahman, the self, alone is and always is, it is imperishable. If something is imperishable, that means it also exists now, isn't it? If it exists now and that actually you are, if you try hard enough, you can realize that you are today, now, here. So that yogi whose conquest is that alone and achieves that without any other motives. I'm doing that for something. I'm doing that for my family. I'm doing that for my own next birth, heaven. All that separate motives lead to other directions because they're creating a desire which requires supply. That's a next birth. Done. Over. Next birth. You end this life with a great desire, sattvic desire to help the world. Done. Over. Desire requires supply now. Next birth. I'm just making it a joke, but that's how it works. Demand and supply. You may be the greatest Dalai Lama, but even if the Dalai Lama dies, hoping that millions of hungry people are not getting food, and he has this very pure desire to help these hungry people. So the mind has the desire, simplifying it, but the mind has the desire to help. Therefore, what is required? If the mind has a desire to help, it necessarily needs a world in which help is required, in which you are projected as that embodied form, in which there are poor people, sad people, suffering people. Why? Because your mind wanted to help. At the highest level, let's not demean people in our world who actually need help. We're talking philosophy here. So we may be mean and curt sometimes because we're trying to make a higher point. So if you are addicted to helping, you are going to create a disabled world that you can fix. That's the poison of samsara. If you are highly generous and caught up with generosity beyond a point of fault, you're going to find supply of where you can be generous every single day, which your spouse or children don't notice. You notice all the time. It's your world. So you'll project it in a way that suits your desires. If you're a smoker and you walk in the road, your eye will immediately catch the attention of the cigarette shops to the left and right and left and right. The other person may not notice. Simple example, but in the example of birth after birth, whatever your motives are, that's what you're going to project, sir. Even if it's benevolent in nature. So you got to be very careful about benevolent motives as well as selfish motives. How good or bad your motive is doesn't matter as long as there are unfulfilled desires that require expression. Death after death. This is gospel truth, says Krishna. This is the law of nature. Why? Because there's a law of karma. It's self-governing, as we have seen it. Krishna doesn't want you to be born or die. Brahman doesn't care about, it doesn't have any motive. It is a self-governing law of karma itself that puts us into this loop. And that's why through karma yoga, we got to get out of this loop through viveka and vairagya. We got to negate this and assert the self. And when we have done this with 100% pristine devotion, we become the self. And then there is no loop. There is no demand. There is no supply. And then in that self-realization, you realize in and through all of this, at all times, you were always the self. There was nothing to worry about in the past, present, or future. Only when you're in the side of ignorance, you see it as a separation. Oh, I'm in ignorance, the self is there. No self-realized master sees that. Self-realized masters asks, what world? What universe? We can't appreciate that state now because we are here. So for us, karma yoga is required to first pacify our own minds, to assert the right thing, negate the wrong thing. That self-realized master would say, there is no world to negate, though they are living in the world. What does that state mean? We can't appreciate it. So let's not go there. But that's what Krishna is saying. There's one path, Arjuna, where there is no motive but realizing me. These yogis, having become self-realized, upon death do not return. The second path, the dark path, for example, is where a yogi is devoted to gods and devas, and in this case, with interested motives of heaven, going to Brahmalok, which means having a better life. I want this, I want that. They enjoy the heavens, of course, but return through to the web of samsara again. So in 26, he says, Arjuna, both these paths, the path of the bright and the dark, which is the path of no return and the path of return, both are considered to be eternal. Both propagate unto itself. In one, the yogi reaches the eternal supreme state with no return. So that's imperishable, eternal nature of himself. In the other, the person is subjected to the eternal cycle of birth and death again and again. And who knows, in the cycle of birth and death, not always will you have the little window of opportunity of intellect as a human being that you have today, sir. What is the guarantee that you're going to have the same bandwidth of intelligence that you have now to appreciate this? It is a luxury beyond luxury, any luxury, to have a narrow bandwidth in our punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, births after births, deaths after deaths. 99.9 of it could have been lived in pure ignorance because of our own tamas. Our own punya and merits have given us the small window to appreciate, understand, and get out of this cycle mentally, not physically, not jumping somewhere, but mentally. But alas, the law of the world, this is the second path that we are cashing in on our karma, cashing in on our punya unnecessarily with all the activities that we do. Think of how we use our time, how we spend our time. It seems like free will. Sir, what is the remote consequences of that, sir? An eternity of birth and death and birth and death. It has no meaning at all, sir. You may say birth and death is nice because I'm with my family, etc. These are small joys of life. So they fold back with you, sir. You don't leave a world where anything exists. You don't leave a world for 5 years after you die and come back as into a rebirth in this world. That's not how Advaita, that's not how things work according to Advaita. It is your mind that requires expression which projects the world. It is your mind that stops requiring that expression that the world folds back into. There is no independent world outside of your mind. The mind is not contained in the body, sir. The body is contained in the mind. You are not contained in the world, sir. The world is contained within your mind. The world is just a fully expressed form of your mind. Just like the dream world is just a fully expressed form of your mind. A fragment of your mind, when fully expressed, was the dream world. Another fragment of your mind, when fully expressed, is the waker world. As your vasana imprints in your mind keep changing, these fragments change and different worlds are projected. One is Brahmaloka, wow, great. Another is a pathetic experience. A third is nice. As vasana imprints change, the worlds change. It's eternal, this projection of birth after birth. But when each of these projections folds back into your mind, sir, your loved ones in that projection were all figment of your own mind. There is nothing you're sacrificing for. There's nobody you are leaving behind your will and your money for. It all folds back. A self-realized person realizes that as implicit, self-evident, a priori knowledge. And therefore, he's not attached to anything. And therefore, he's disinterested in this. And therefore, he revels in the beauty of the one truth, the self. The Akshara Brahman. The one thing that is truly indestructible, imperishable, which is the backdrop upon which all of this is happening, which is you now at this moment, because without that, how can you even think? The mind is inert without being animated by the self. The intellect is inert if not animated by this, and the bulb is inert if it's not animated by electricity, though it's the bulb that shines as electricity. So you are that Nirguna Brahman at this moment, because if you're not, you will not be conscious. So to finish this, so there are two eternal cycles, paths. Which eternal path are you going to take? Krishna is asking and inviting us. The eternal path of no return, where you enter into you become the imperishable Brahman, or the other path, which is the eternal cycle of birth and death. And finally, Krishna says in the last two slokas, knowing thus the secret of these two paths, Arjuna, a true yogi never gets deluded. Therefore, Arjuna, at all times be steadfast in yoga in the form of equanimity of constantly striving for my realization. The yogi Arjuna, therefore, realizing this profound truth of what happens to the soul after death, having realized this profound truth, a yogi transcends all rewards enumerated for the study of the Vedas and performance of austerities, sacrifices, charities, all that is lower rewards. Initially, we are taught to do all of these things. Why? Because we are so engulfed with bad desires and our own minds and selfishness that we are nudged into austerities and sacrifices and charities to get out of our mediocre desires, to get some discipline in our lives, to think beyond our own selfish nature and think a little selfless. Austerities, sacrifices, charities, all instill that discipline in us. The rewards enumerated for the study of Vedas, the scriptural knowledge and the rewards that gives, great karmic imprints that it gives, takes us to heavenly abodes of the lokas. But the yogi, what does he do? Upon realizing the ultimate secret, this profound truth that Krishna has told us, keeps all of these at bay as well, transcends even the rewards that we seek to gain from the study of the Vedas, the rewards of performance of austerities and sacrifices and charities and benevolence and generosity, the rewards accumulated by good karma, all that as well, having realized what? The imperishable Brahman, the truth that the path that I want to take is that to the imperishable Brahman, nothing else, no good life, no protecting others, no saving the world, no saving myself, no heaven, no hell. The only path I want is discover my own nature as that imperishable Brahman. And when I discover my own nature as that imperishable Brahman, I'm done. That's the path of no return. So that yogi who realizes this profound truth transcends all these rewards and attains the one supreme from which there is no return. That is the yoga of Akshara Brahman, the imperishable yoga. That's chapter 8 for us. With that, we'll finish today's class of chapter 8, the yoga of the imperishable Brahman. Remember, we're in the second chapter of the Tat part of Gita, loosely, where we're talking about the Brahman, not the self, not the Atman. We're talking about God, not about our Jiva, because we're talking about the universal aspect of God now, before we bring it together. So as we end, please repeat after me. Om Tat Saditi, Om Tat Saditi, Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su, Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su, Upanishadsu, Brahma Vidyayam, Yoga Shastre, Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade,